Coffee Sketch Podcast is our take on the intersection of old tech and new tech, the space between the traditional practice of the hand-drawn sketch that has been performed by architects and designers for centuries, and the modern-day use of the hashtag as a representation of a sentiment or a movement. Hey Jamie, how you doing?
100.
100. Say it again.
100.
100. We have, and those we're not practicing different takes. We're just going to say 100.
Yes.
100 times.
Yeah.
Finally, let's say
like, for all the people who have small children, like the 100th day of school is like 100 day apparently is like a big deal. I don't remember this when I was a kid, but
yeah, I don't remember that.
So their teachers get creative and they're like, this is 100 pencils. This is 100 pencils isn't creative, but
what
you know,
we need like 100 owls.
100 owls or like 100 coffee cups.
Well, I know we have more than 100 sketches.
Yes, we definitely have more than 100 sketches.
Well, what's the temp? You told me that it's getting warm in Austin.
It's getting warm. So we're going to have I think in honor of our 100th episode, we're going to have a week of 100-degree temperatures here in Austin.
Wow. That's great. I mean, for the commemoration, maybe not so great for the life.
Not for the climate, but
the climate or lifestyle.
Right.
Maybe it'll keep Jamie inside in the AC sketching.
Sure. Let's go with that.
Well, we've got to, the goal will be 200. And hopefully when we hit 200, it won't be 200 degrees.
Yeah, we don't want that. No.
Only in our cup, 200 degree coffee.
Well, or something.
You go first. Anything what's the coffee that's celebrating 100?
I'm still going with this new limited edition blend that's gonna inspire Kurt to go back to the store. It is a vanilla with a Madagascar vanilla. I did not know there was such thing. Apparently such things exist. But yeah, it's I don't know how different it is than vanilla from somewhere else, but no, it's very nice with a little bit of a honey flavor to it.
That's great. I've forgotten. Well, I too, I'm still, since we are at 100, I'm drinking Starbucks as well. So I've still got a little bit of the Yukon blend, which fires me up.
Yeah, like you're on your what, 6th to 7th cup today?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just getting started.
Right.
It's just the beginning. I've got 100 to drink today.
Yeah. Lots of sketches to do. So,
hey man, congratulations! Thank you for joining me to make 100 of these episodes.
I know this is like our big group hug moment. Kurt had this crazy idea and like, hey, why don't we do a podcast where no one can see us and no one can see these sketches, and let's talk about them and also have a cup of coffee, make it a conversation. So here we are 100 episodes later, and yes, we do them with the video on, which is intriguingly fun as well. And I think we've been getting a little bit better. Hopefully maybe we'll do a little bit more live sketching in the next 100 episodes.
Yeah, the tech has improved a tiny bit. I'm still thinking about how to do the live. Still working on that one. There's some tools and apps.
Yeah. Apps. Yes. Well, and I do have some news for the 100th episode. So speaking of live sketching, I was selected again to do a workshop for the State Architecture Conference here in Texas, which will be in El Paso this fall. And so I will be doing again a 3-hour workshop on coffee sketching on
Awesome.
tour in situ, in the real life.
Very cool.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Well, where's the Alamo? Is the Alamo El Paso?
Alamo is in San Antonio. Yeah, so that was last year's. So,
well, this is a terrible blunder of mine, since we decided to talk about some sketches of some historical architecture. I don't even know where the Alamo.
yeah, you don't even know where the Alamo is. It's all right. Texas is the big state.
There's a likelihood I might not know where this building is. I'm just kidding.
I'm not really sure. Well, is El Paso? Yeah, El Paso, West Texas.
I do know that there is the UTEP.
Yes.
University of Texas, El Paso. And those, I think, isn't the UTEP the home of the UTEP two-step?
Oh, I don't.
Two-step? Well, how about the UTEP two-sketch?
Are these like dad jokes?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I learned them from my dad.
Yeah. Or you channeling your brother. So
that's right. He's in town. He's a dad. And he's a seasoned dad joke inventor.
Right. Well, he's also an engineer, which I think like is sort of a terrible combination for those types of things.
But he does listen, and he's gonna feel a little chapped. He's gonna pull the rights to our theme music. We're gonna have to. No, he won't. We'll apologize. We'll have to get him a coffee sketch mug and a pin, and
he needs swag. Yeah, just get some swag. Just give him some swag.
We need swag. Yeah. Speaking of which, see, there should be a logo on that mug, but there's not. So before we get into the sketch, Jamie, we gave a shout out to a good friend on episode 99, our friend Ilya, running for office at AIA National. So today we should shout out another good friend, a fellow architect, a fellow AIA colleague, committee fellow, as far as we shared committee work with her on the Young Architects Forum. And she is a fellow of the AIA as well, as Ilya is. Evelyn Lee, the co-host, I suppose, of Practice of Architecture podcast on
the West Coast.
The West Coast.
So Texas, third coast, best coast.
The 100-degree coast.
Ilya on the East Coast, Evelyn on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. Yes. But yeah, Evelyn is also running for office, and definitely endorsing that as well, and hoping that she will be successful in her bid to be the next AIA president.
Right. She's running for VP, then president-elect. And so we at Coffee Sketch Podcast are rooting for you, Evelyn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you haven't heard their podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, and if you haven't heard their podcast, definitely.
Janine and Evelyn of Practice of Architecture. It's really good stuff.
Well, and I think some of it too is, you and I were chatting about this offline last week, was that in Evelyn's role with the Young Architects Forum and her interest in practice and how practices the evolution of practice in architecture, both for her own career trajectory and then the things that she's been interested in and people that she's met along the way. She did a conference and basically helped organize and spearhead a conference that you and I both attended, which was the Young Architect Forum Summit 25. So the 25th year of the Young Architects Forum at national level. And so you and I participated in that in Virginia with, I guess, 48 other colleagues, and discussed sort of what the next, not just the next generation of architects would be, but sort of the next evolution of what architecture role practice would be. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a fun format, couple good days of interesting discussions and presentations, kind of creative problem solving, and it was good. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And honestly, and I don't know if I probably haven't mentioned this no, maybe I have, but one of the big takeaways I think from Summit 25 was which was named the Practice Innovation Lab, was the idea of sort of a decentralized and remote office structure that could compete at the same level as sort of what traditional practice, which involves all hands on deck, sort of in an office physical space together. And so one of the, I think, success models out of that is the Jam Collective, which is part of which this group is comprised of some fellow Young Architect Forum colleagues as well, Christian and Abby and a few others that we didn't actually share committee time with. But the cool thing is they have taken that and carried it forward, right? And so now fast forward 5 years later, which I think in any professional organization, to see something conceptualized one term in less than 5 years, because it's already been it's already in what's the word, in the works, it's already working, it's already a thing, well before the next summit. I mean, stumble through that one, but basically less than 5 years you have proof of concept of this sort of model or sort of office model, which I don't think, if we didn't discuss this, I mean, I'm not going to say that it was only thought of in Summit 25, but just by having Summit 25, that conversation, this pandemic that forced everybody to a remote work model, kind of shed light on that, hey, this can work. And by being forced into that position by, sheltering at home or working from home. Anyway, so that's exciting. I think it's always exciting to see something come to fruition from concept.
Right. Well, I mean, and just, it was, I think, exposure for a lot of us to, again, you and I've talked about this quite a bit, and others as well, is the benefit of having served on a national committee for our professional society. Was service is something that is sort of ingrained in us, and something that is part of our own ethic. It's just who we are as people. But I think that the privilege of being able to serve on that is one thing, but I think it was sort of the bonus is that you get to have this opportunity to see what other people in similar stations in life, in their careers, different stations in life, different backgrounds, from all over the country, are having discussions that are either similar to yours or so different that the exposure to that is the real benefit. Sort of this opportunity to kind of hear out of context, putting yourself out of your own context and into a conversation, was always sort of I'm stumbling through this one, but it's as an answer, but I think I've always just loved it. I mean, it's energizing and refreshing to have those kinds of conversations with folks. And I think the summit was a snapshot of that, of course, but like you say, I mean, there were some tangible results from that, some of which we didn't necessarily, expect at the time. I don't think that they went into that conference thinking that Jam was going to be something that existed post-conference. And then you look at what Evelyn and that podcast are doing in terms of having, extended conversations about practice of architecture and the breadth of what that means. It's not just the practice like this, it's the practice like this, which you and I tend to talk about anyways from our own perspectives. But yeah, I think it's that exposure has always been something that has been the hidden benefit It's of being part of the professional society, as much as you and I both disagree with quite a bit of some of the politics of things, for lack of a better term. I think that you can be the change agent from the interior or the exterior. And you and I have always sort of done it from the interior, even if we sometimes feel compelled to be on the exterior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, I really wish Evelyn the best, as well as Ilya, but Evelyn especially, because I think that her own career trajectory would bring a really fresh perspective about this sort of practice of architecture and what does the future hold.
Yeah. And so as we segue into our sketch for today, one more 100 is, I think, the premise of Summit 30 is to zoom into the future 100 years and think about what the profession of architecture looks like. So that's the sort of the strategy for that conversation, which is really intriguing, and I think is going to be a very fruitful session that they put together.
Oh, I think it will be, and I think as we transition to the sketch for today, is as much as Summit 30, projects out 100 years into a future sense, as architects do. I mean, architects and artists and philosophers and educators and practitioners of all types will look at manifestos for the future, try and figure out what that sort of futurist think kind of concept is. But I think that what the sketch is, and sort of the conversation, the shorter conversation today will be about, is as much as we're projecting forward, we can't ignore the past and how we grapple with it, and the conversations that weren't had, and the histories that weren't told, and the stories that people don't want to have because they find them uncomfortable. And when those intersections occur in a built reality, it's not just about encountering somebody and having that conversation that may be uncomfortable, but being in a space that makes somebody feel uncomfortable because you're living with that built history. And that's something that I had a recent experience with. And so a couple of weeks ago, went to my first National Main Street conference. Hadn't gotten on a plane in a long time, which was, of course, pandemic world, but flew to Virginia. Conference was in Richmond, and was excited to see a city that I had not been in and explore, but also to connect with colleagues who are doing similar work to mine, but in different states. And so, I'm in Texas, and working as a Main Street architect for the state, but have colleagues that I've been conferencing with in Zoom rooms for months and months over the past 2 years, I guess. And so this was an opportunity to see a lot of them in person. And what we do is pre-conference to the larger conference, the architects get together for 2 days and share best practices, and then do some architectural tours, do the architecture junkie, figure out where we're going, who's local, what things that are on our wish list to go see. And so one part of that tour was going to UVA and actually seeing the campus that Thomas Jefferson's brainchild was. And so the sketch is of the rotunda and his version of the Pantheon in rural Virginia. So that was a treat for me, because at least the Pantheon as a building, as I've shared on the podcast before, is arguably my favorite building. And so to know that was the touchstone architecturally that Jefferson wanted to emulate with this particular building and the campus was just interesting just to see. I mean, not even talking about him as an architect or as a person, or as a past president. It's just knowing that architectural lineage to this from a process standpoint was just sort of an interesting thing to see and walk around and then inhabit. But yeah, that was.
So does it have, I mean, we both have been to the Pantheon, luckily.
Yep.
And yeah, it's also, it's one of those things that I would love to get to see in person myself, just knowing, to have that experience of historic American architecture that like you said earlier, related to current events as far as race and the history of the country, and Jefferson as a part of that history, and slaves and indentured people. Or I'm thinking of the anyway. So I was thinking of another term and I couldn't remember. I apologize. So anyway, whether or not the history should be amplified, but at least understanding the time and the place. So anyway, so the question was, does the interior of this rotunda have that same sort of close effect that the Pantheon Dome has? Or is it different? Okay.
Different.
I don't remember.
Entirely different, because this actually has multiple floors in it. And even that to a certain degree has changed over time, because there was a fire with the building. And it was restored. And actually, I think this is the second restoration of the building, which is the second one is a little bit more sensitive to some of the original aspects of the design. And so we were actually able to tour the campus with the campus art, which was fantastic. So most university campuses have a campus architect. In this particular case, when the architect is Thomas Jefferson, of the original architect of the campus, there's some aspects of that role today for a campus architect that certainly have a lot of baggage. and it probably a different role than most campus architects. But the gentleman who toured us around, I can't remember his name, he was very generous with his time, but also sort of his description of things and describing the process of the current restoration of the building and the documents that they historically had to go back and go through the archive. And it was nice to hear him sort of be critical of the lack of drawings that Jefferson had for this building and for the campus in general. The drawing set was pretty limited, but at the same time, there were some very exacting specifications for the building. And a lot of them were related to Jefferson's understanding of Italian architecture and his understanding of Palladio and understanding of the Pantheon. And so there was an exacting specification of what his theoretical premise from there to here was. And then, of course, there were some less than spectacular accounting for that specification, where some of the Corinthian columns that you're seeing here might have also been part of a work order where some of those things went for Monticello as well. So you had the university and his residence both being effectively developed at the same time. And so the architect was talking about, when they went back through to find a lot of documentation of that interior space. Back to your question of what was the dome like? Was it painted? What was the ornament of it? How should it be rendered today? So they went back through a lot of that documentation, which included the specifications as well as the bill of goods for those things. And this university at the same time has also been going through its own reckoning of that. Mm-hmm. And that brings us to kind of the other image that you had on the screen a moment ago, which is the newest addition to the campus, which is a monument to the enslaved individuals. The enslaved laborers and individuals who effectively built this campus.
Right.
And the story of their lives that came out in a lot of these documents that these architectural historians were looking at related to the buildings themselves, this built history. But in those records, you see this accounting of people.
Wow.
And of a story that really wasn't being told, but was ever present in the buildings and the campus itself. So there was a conscious effort by the university to create a memorial on the campus, in the central campus. And it only was dedicated in 2021. So it was something that I was aware of. There was a lot of news reporting at the time, both architecturally as well as in just sort of regular national press. And so it was something that going to this campus, I definitely wanted to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And it's interesting the old and the new as far as constructions, and then the juxtaposition, to use an architectural term, of the spaces, sort of, above and below, and sort of ornate and minimal and symbolic and retrospective, all kinds of meaning sort of embedded into the design. And actually, let me share real quick the architects of the memorial website real quick. Oh, wrong page. This page. So you and I were talking about this ahead of time, but designed by Howler Yoon, which they're based on the East Coast, but we'll come back to that. So interesting way they've presented it on their website with this nice aerial photo in the wintertime, which is fascinating. This perfect circle that they've created, but it's more like in 3 dimensions, these sort of layers or rings that they've developed, as their description of the project is down below, but representing 4,000 enslaved men, women, and children who built and sustained the daily life of the university. So for faculty, students, staff, or themselves being the staff, holding this whole thing together, right? And so the interesting sighting, right? So if you look at the lower right here, you can see the rotunda in the distance, and then the lawn adjacent, this sort of triangular space of lawn where the memorial is, as it sort of emerges out of the ground. And actually, let me see. I was trying to hint. Oh, you can kind of see it here, but they rendered, and the bit of technology that is sort of leveraged to manufacture this memorial is also intriguing to me, and how they must have sort of computationally derived the chiseling or carving of this stone skin on the memorial. But so that the exterior is sort of etched or manipulated to sort of represent these pair of eyes, which they are attributing. I think it's listed here. Sorry, I'll have to cheat and scroll down. I'll come back to here. The exterior, yes. So the portrait of Isabella Gibbons, and so enslaved worker, but also then a teacher in Charlottesville. So a fascinating sort of integration, I think, of the sort of memorial aspect plus the symbolic aspect of this, and mixed with the technology. And so
and it's good that you bring that up, because I think that's the memorial spaces as a design exercise, just abstracting it here, is they're really difficult to do, because I think, and this one I think spoke to, there was a lot of community discussion and community engagement in developing what is being memorialized here, who is being memorialized here, how is it being memorialized, what story are we trying to explain, how is it going to be rendered, what feelings are we trying to evoke with the space. All of those things from a memorial standpoint are, and then it's setting, like you showed that sort of initial image of it in the snow. and there's an exactingness to the campus. There's as an architect or as a designer, there's a formality of campus geometry. Many campuses across the United States in their planning and campus planning were influenced by Jefferson and UVA and that sort of quad idea. So there's a lot of the design intent that is already present in this place. And then you add to that this kind of concept of trying to memorialize 4,000 or almost 5,000 individuals and their stories that have never been told in an object or in a place. And that is an incredibly audacious task. And so I think you highlighting some of the technological aspects that they leaned into to accentuate aspects of the design, I think is really unique to this memorial that we don't necessarily see in other memorial. I can't think of another memorial that tries to do this in this particular way. And there's the thing that we were talking about, as we were sort of getting ready to do this conversation, was the thing that had struck me in how all of the names or descriptions, because some of these people aren't named. Mm-hmm. In the records of the campus, some people are only listed by their profession or their task that they were attributed to and how they were counted. And so, but each one of those individual stories of memory is rendered as a mark on the internal ellipse of this circle. And when it rains, it really has a powerful, it's a bit humanizing as well to a stone surface. And there's a pain and a sadness with seeing that. I think that's intentional and difficult and intentionally difficult and really effective. So I wanted to see it in person. And you read these types of descriptions of what some of its process is and the things that they're after, and then to see it in real life and experience it yourself, you can really come away with a lot. I'm not even sure I have words to describe some of these things.
Yeah, I bet the being there in person was extremely moving. And so I'm glad you got to go there. One day I would like to try and get there myself. It says here, just to expand a bit on the memory marks, is it signifies those that were lost to historical record. However, as they uncover names, they will add them to the wall. And so, yeah, so each mark of these sort of slashes in the stone represent an individual. And so some have names, some don't. Some have as whatever information, as you mentioned, was known, like their skill set or task, job that they were assigned to. And so that's also kind of an interesting aspect of memorial, is the ability to sort of evolve or expand the information within the memorial. And the other thing I think about this one in particular is, and I think this image is really good at showing that, is that how a memorial is not just a statue, but actually is more of a place that you can use as a public space, like a plaza or an enclosure, or so it's occupiable versus statuesque or a sort of monumental, right? So it's not just something to look at, but something that can bring people together within.
Well, and that it's not planned, is that, yeah. That I think that's the thing. As architects and designers, oftentimes we try and plan all of those experiences, and I think that image you just had on the screen that's not planned. That's people deciding how they're going to occupy that space.
Yeah.
And what's appropriate, and maybe what's appropriate then maybe changes over time, and that's okay too. And so I think that that allows for people to engage with it and sort of make it their own, and sort of expand that story. And those are the things that I think always give me pause as a designer. Is there's things that you imagine how people might use something, but there's also there has to be some humility in realizing that you don't know. You don't know how something's going to be received, and you don't know how something's going to be used. And sometimes in that not knowing, you get the best results.
Yeah. It reminds me actually of something my very first studio instructor in first year told me, is that you don't get to stand outside your building with a pamphlet that tells people how to use it.
Exactly.
And that's a perfect, I think, summary of how this and all good works of architecture evolve or take on its own sense of meaning and place. And there's a lot of subtlety in the design. It may look simple, like a ring of stone, but and I'll, this is going to be my last point, because it's such a simple looking structure, sculpture, but I mean, the more I look at it, the more it evolves into, or just exposes the technical precision, which Howler-Yoon, if you're not familiar with their work, they do a variety of different project scales, but started out, I think, doing a lot more installation work, but in a not just temporary installation but things that are very well crafted, right? Almost like fabrications. If you were, I mean, the interesting thing, kind of tying back to like Evelyn's work with the Practice Innovation Lab, is like kind of rethinking like what an architect is and does. And Howler-Yoon kind of represent this expanded definition of, it's not just about designing something to get a permit, but following through with the craft of that object and how it is completed, and how it then engages with its site. So, for example, you could see here, down here, the ring is at this sidewalk level, and the bottom of the outer ring, and this sort of ledge that becomes an inner ring, but that inner ring becomes this bench, and the outer ring becomes this wall. And then somewhere between the grade, that this ground is sloping, something is sloping down. So as the circle comes around, it's kind of going down into the ground and back up. So it's a very subtle, like geometrical shift, even though, and with a round thing, I mean, could go on and all the detail, but I don't know, you were there, so I would imagine you felt the spatial relationship change as you moved around this thing.
Well, and it's yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is I think spaces like this want to evoke a feeling, and I think that we've talked about it from just even buildings. Kind of jumping out for a second, is buildings and art evoke feeling and emotion, and are connected or disconnected from a place and or a story. And there is some art and craft in executing things in this sort of exacting way, like you described. I mean, that's the perfect example. Your original studio prof telling you, you're not going to get to stand outside here and explain your design to everybody who comes to visit it. This is that type of a space. It's a perfect, a perfect way to kind of capsulize it. This would be completely ruined as an object, as a space, as a memorial, as a place to yet be programmed, or a place that evolves, if there was a placard at the entrance that explained it's unnecessary, it's too much. Mm-hmm. And there's enough in it for people to spend the time and discover things for themselves and inhabit this place. And I think that's part of it. That's sort of the fun, interesting aspect of architecture and design, is sort of realizing that you have to let go a little bit. And in instances like this where the conversation is difficult, you can have a really simple design that says so much. And I think that was, like you say, how I experienced it. It is a simple, straightforward object that can be read one way. But taking the time and inhabiting it and experiencing it and exploring it and thinking about it and sitting with it, as a person in this context of, over here is this building that we've studied in architecture school, and now I'm in this space adjacent to it that's in dialogue with it. How does that make me feel as a person? How does that make me feel as an architect, as a designer? That's the power of place. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity for us to talk about this, and you always find a way to summarize it with something that's really super straightforward, and I always appreciate that.
Yeah, no, this is great. It's a little challenging, sort of. Oh, we never pull punches.
No.
And episode 100, I guess, shouldn't be any different. And so we're not afraid to at least get into open up the dialogue or the conversation on a subject matter. But so anyway, thanks for sharing your sketches, and for 100 episodes, and we'll have to have 200 episodes under our belt pretty soon.
Soon enough.